So the purpose of this webinar, right, is to understand how to break down, data silos to enable organization to create more centralized and optimize for data analysis and improve collaboration and enhance productivity, right? So, and also gain a comprehensive view of this operation. So the purpose is quite clear. So in this particular discussions, we'll be delving into understanding the data silos problem to begin with, and followed by the role of cloud in data integration, followed by leveraging automation, and then overcoming some of the technical barriers, and then some of the KPIs and measure to, successfully measure some of these deployments and see the ROI side of things. Yeah. So yeah, welcome everyone to the second session of DECODE webinar powered by DBS Tech India. We have Louis today. He's the Executive Director at DBS Bank. He's an expert in data platforms and automation with a robust background in cloud solutions and big data analytics. So joining Louis, we have Sriram Venkat. He's the APAC head and analytics services at Google. He leads the team that drives data-driven decision making and optimized performance through advanced data infrastructure and analytics. Welcome, Louis. Welcome, Sriram. Happy to have you guys here today.
Thank you. Same here. Look forward for a very insightful and fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Sriram. Louis, welcome to the webinar.
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. Hopefully, we can have an insightful session today about how to break data silos and how to leverage cloud technologies for seamless data integration. Sounds like an interesting topic today.
Absolutely. And it's the most known problem as well, right? So nearly 85% of enterprises today see data silos as a significant challenge to their digital transformation journey there. So what are your views in terms of some of the recent trends? Does this data hold true, or you have worked with a lot of these customers and clients of yours? So what are some of the, what is the main cause or the root of these kind of challenges that exist within the enterprises that you have noticed, and where do the customers or the client come to you for what are some of the challenges that they face as an enterprise? So I think we can start with Louis and then followed by Sriram adding.
Yeah, so let's kind of set the stage, right?
Yes.
Let's start with a core definition of a data silo, right? Which is,
Yes.
in a way, we can define that as a collection of data that is not easy accessible across the organization, right? And typically that occurs when different departments or systems within a company store and manage data separately without integration or communication within other parts of the organization, right? So the when you look at that holistically, it is an unavoidable problem waiting to happen, because as data silos are repositories of data, there are disparate softwares and systems that don't communicate well with each other, and simply even departmental geographical separation within the organization, right? And there's a lack of unified data strategy across the entire organization. And you can find some legacy systems that are very difficult to integrate. And on top of that, you can add one of the most common causes, the organizational culture that doesn't promote data sharing in general, right? Some of those things are natural consequences of causes or possible causes of data silos, right? Among that, there is some level of problems that are created by data silos that I see commonly. So basically, you can have situations where you have incomplete views of business operations and customers end to end. You can have a very inefficient decision making, because what happens is there's a lack of comprehensive data. You're going to have data that it's representative of different, with different points of views, let's say. Then you're going to have duplicate efforts around data and information. And you will have inconsistency and conflicting data across departments and across the organization, and generating a very difficult data analysis and reporting. And so of course that ultimately ends up with a reduced productivity and collaboration across the organization. Right. So what happens with the silos is that, of course, there's an impact to the business, right? Which so that will tend to hinder digital transformation, and that will limit the ability for meaningful insights from the data, and that can actually lead to very poor customer experience ultimately, right? And one of the biggest challenge to address on the data silos is that particular complexity of integrating a diverse ecosystem of systems across that the companies have honed for sometimes years, right? And then putting a data governance and a data security around it becomes fundamental elements on how to drive the entire data strategy across the organization. And you're gonna face a lot of cost, time investment on data integration, and the waterfall effect happens because then the organization is gonna forcefully resist the change on it, right? But if you're able to break everything that I just described, right, the benefits are extremely quantifiable, right? Improved decision making with holistic data. You will have better customer insights, better experience. You're going to increase your operational efficiency. You're going to have more accurate, consistent reporting, and those are some possibilities. Of course, there are different strategies. Implementing cloud-based solutions as a central anchor point for centralized data storage is one of the possibilities, right? It's not the only one, but it's one of them. How do you adopt different, extraction, transformation, loading of information, or so-called ETLs, or a unified data strategy and governance framework is some of the areas that I can cover. But yeah, that kind of gives you a little bit of my brain, how I break the problem apart, right? So that, Sriram can go all into it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think Louis covered most of the points. The difficulty of going after somebody who knows the subject well, like most of the points are taken, but plus one to whatever Louis mentioned. But I also want to add, right, some experiences that we've seen with a lot of analytics data leaders is wanting to, kickstart or jump into all AI, ML, and all those fancy things without even having the foundational data capability, right? I think as analytics leaders, we need to educate business within our organization or our customers that the analytics magic, or the all the AI magic happens across different domains of data, right? So if a marketing domain is going to keep its marketing domain, if a finance domain is only going to keep its finance data in a different silo, it's very hard to cross correlate these different data sources and drive out any insights. And that's one reason why many organizations are failing to sort of reap any ROI from many of their digital transformation or AI ML sort of efforts. So investing in a central data lake, data warehouse, and a logical step to that is a lot of the emergence of cloud data warehouses that we see, which have the capability to integrate with different systems and curate a data lake. Is a very worthy investment that that all IT leaders and analytics leaders should pursue. It's almost a prerequisite before any digital transformation journey, were to be kicked. And that's of course all points that that Louis mentioned around not having a single source of truth, different departments reporting different numbers for the same metrics,
Correct.
uh, inefficient ways of computing.
Correct.
Those are all challenges that that will exist. The sooner this sponsorship or this journey of unified data warehouse starts, the better it is for an organization to become data driven.
Very interesting, very interesting. I just want to understand, like, what is stopping enterprises from, understanding, building such unified data pipelines or data capabilities before delving into some of these AI initiatives that they do, right? So I just want to understand, like, what is stopping them, because that number also is staggering. 85% is not a small number. I just want to know, like, what is stopping enterprises from building such capabilities? Like, just if you can break it down very simple for the attendees and audience. So meanwhile, attendees can ask questions. We will be collecting it in the end. So can we break it down, like what is stopping enterprises from breaking this particular data silos? We explain why it is challenging, what is the consequence of that, and what is the need also we discussed. But my question is, what is stopping them from breaking the data silos? Because that is the today's discussions around the webinar as well. What is stopping them from
Yeah.
breaking silos? Yeah.
So look, I think we've covered some of it already, right? But if we were to break the problem apart, and define it as what are the factors that prevent the organizations from breaking down the data silos effectively.
Makes
right?
sense.
The one of the initial principles that you're going to find is legacy systems, right?
Yes.
And legacy systems can be defined by older, outdated systems that are not compatible with modern integration technologies, right? And replacing the systems is quite costly, right? And there you have one of the first fundamental anchor points of what prevents this, right? Then you have your organizational culture, right? Which is departments could be reluctant to share their information, right? And there's a lack of collaborative culture around that hinders data integration efforts, and it doesn't hone it, right? And along with that, when you follow that journey of what I was defining as several factors and considerations, right? The data governance concerns are something that provides uncertainty because there's no clear definition of who owns the data and is responsible for the data, right? Those concerns about data quality and consistency start emerging, right? Then you have security and privacy issues. There are fears about data breaches or unauthorized access to data that is being integrated, compliance requirements like GDPR, MAS 644, RBI, OJK in Indonesia. There's different regulations around it. And of course, you can wrap all that up with technical complexity, right? Integrating diverse systems, data formats could be technically challenging, right? And they lack, the owned companies could lack this expertise to implement and manage integrated systems, and then as some of the last talking points that I have is, of course, we can add cost, right? The significant investment to technology, new infrastructure. There is a lack of executive support. Most of the time, you're going to find that top-level buy-in on silo breaking initiatives may not necessarily get you the resources that you need, because there's an absence of lack of a clear data strategy at a leadership level, right? And I think one of the biggest problems is that there is an unclear ROI on this, right? And I said the word unclear, right? Because it's quite difficult to quantify the benefits of breaking the silos.
Yeah.
What is the long-term nature of the benefits that may not align necessarily with the short term of the benefits or the business goals at the time, right? So that's probably some of the contribution I can give you on that.
That's a long list of things that's stopping enterprise from adopting. Very interesting. So I think Sriram can join in here. Sriram, do you think like cloud integration helps break these data silos? Somewhere you mentioned also building those unified data platform. So just want to understand like how cloud can solve data silos problem there for enterprises.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think cloud solutions, right, or
yeah,
cloud data warehousing solutions
yeah.
offer end-to-end, like data lifecycle management.
Correct,
Uh, right from your ingesting data, there are
correct,
cloud solutions have native connectivity with many of your popular ERP systems. Could be
correct.
your SAP or Salesforce,
Got it.
uh, you know one is API integrators, and then the ability to even write custom integrations with your own homegrown solutions, with your transactional databases and so on, right? So right from your ingesting data
Got it.
to sort of orchestrating the data, which is your typical ETL, extract, transform, load, or extract, load, and transform, right? And then offering data warehousing solutions, right, like your BigQueries and so on,
Got it.
which can put your organizational data in a central location in a very organized way,
Mm-hmm.
uh, with governance, access controls, and so on, right? And access control even means very, how do I say, sophisticated levels of access controls. Like, for example, you may have revenue data somewhere where you want to show that revenue data only to that particular region. So if I'm
Correct.
a regional sales rep in India, I
Correct.
should only be seeing my revenue numbers, right? So even row level access controls,
Mm-hmm.
and then utilities to, like to let us know when data pipelines fail,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to even retiring data and so on, right? So this, uh, whatever steps I laid out, you can almost sum it up as a data lifecycle management for any data that goes in.
Yes.
And then, not to mention, your presentation layer, like your dashboarding layer, like Looker, or Power BI and so on, and then similarly AI ML solutions,
Correct.
which are natively available in your cloud. So it's a one suite which offers 360-degree capabilities of the the data life cycle. So that actually makes it much easier for
Mm-hmm.
organizations to to move away from these data silos to a central data data warehouse based in cloud. And of
Got it.
course, cloud being cloud, the ability to dial up and dial down depending upon how your data grows
Mm-hmm.
makes it a very, very healthy and easy proposition, so to say, to drive this journey.
Amazing, amazing. So that's the solution I think most enterprises kind of overlook. The potential is immense. So I'll just come back to Lewis as well, right? So Lewis, can you share some example from particularly in the banking sector, how these some of the solution that you have developed using cloud, and how have you broken those data silos, and how it has kind of improved? If you can give some interesting insights, numbers in terms of how it has helped increase the efficiency for within the organization for your customers as well as internally as well. Yeah.
Following up on what Sriram was building upon, right? So cloud does play a significant role into solving the data silo problem, right?
Got it. Got it.
And some of the key points that it can address, and then I'm gonna combine a little bit because you touch about the financial sector,
Correct.
right? And I also saw some of the questions on data localization, regulatory compliance, etc. Right? So some of the factors that play out are, the first and foremost is we need to understand the specific regulations that exist.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the data protection laws on the regions that we play, right? So for example, it could be Singapore PDPA, it could be Malaysia's PDPA, Indonesia PDP, right? It could be RBI. I mean, there's different expressions of regulation that exist.
Correct.
Among that, there is a data classification element to this, which is quite important, right? Which is the sensitivity of the data based on the regulatory requirements, right? That allows you to implement the appropriate controls among each data category, right? Now, level set that a lot of people believes that the data lake is a centralized element, but that doesn't need to be a centralized element. It could be a geographically dispersed data lake, but it has the same requirements, the same data classifications, the same data ingestion, the same elements. All the data is treated the same. It just lives in India. It just lives in Singapore. It just lives in Indonesia, right? It's all part of your lake. But it doesn't necessarily need to be one physical data store like people envisions it in their head, right? So then you go on to data localization, right? Some countries do require to be stored cross borders. Region-specific cloud instances and data centers become quite useful for situations like this, right? Because it minimizes the infrastructure spent that we as an organization need to do, right? Whether we wanted to do it on our own data centers, right? Then leveraging some of the key cloud technologies is important. There's major elements on cloud technology today that are extremely useful for the data silo problem. Centralized stores, various sources, easier access, sharing across the organization. Scalability, right? These solutions can scale very easily for growing data volumes. The more data you do, the more data you generate. That's a simple fact, right? Data integration, right? The tools that are native to the cloud for integrating multiple data sources, ETLs, makes it significantly simpler to focus on the problem above and not on the problem below. The problem below is the infra. That's the last problem you want to be in. You want to be solving the problem above, which is trying to solve the problems for the business. But if all of our time is invested into trying to solve how we do infrastructure, we're not going to get out of our plane, right? Real-time data access, collaborative tools to facilitate between teams, departments, and of course, that flexibility to standardize across one unified stack of technology are some of the benefits that cloud provides to us in general, right? Along with that, you know, there is the frameworks that we use. I mean, we see significant efficiencies by, at least for us, we have a unified data platform that is, everything is under the same format. We have different data marts, different feature marts, etc. That has allowed us to do data minimization, right? We can collect in specific silos, collect data and retain data that is necessary for business operations. We can reduce regulatory risks because we also simplify data integration patterns. There is a better data governance framework across the board to establishes the policies, the handling across the organization, complying with the different relevant regulations that exist across the board, right? And because we leverage some cloud technologies, we can define cross-border data transfers, right? And those are mechanisms for lawful cross-border data transfers, right? So we can include standard contractual clauses, binding corporate rules on how data is communicated across. So yeah, all of that you can wrap it up with privacy by design, right? Which is how we incorporate all the privacy considerations into the design of the systems from the scratch. And this actually helps us ensure that the compliance is there from the ground up.
Absolutely. Agree with Louis. Sriram, would you like to add anything here?
No, I think Louis pretty much summed it up, right? Just wanted to add on, right? I mean, yeah, we spoke about how cloud is helpful, but there are also a lot of considerations that
Correct.
that data teams need to be mindful when, like, moving into cloud. There are
Correct.
always choices and trade-offs, like, should I do real-time data processing, or is
Correct.
there should is a batch processing, okay, here, how do I handle data quality,
Correct.
how do I measure data quality accurately, how do I handle exception management, like, when a pipeline fails, how do I, when a critical data job fails,
Mhm.
whom do I notify, how do I fix it, and so on, right? So
Mhm.
these are all, and then traceability of data, like, where does this particular data come from, because you're going to do a lot of logical transformation, so you want to know what is the source from where the data comes from, and so on. So those are all some technical considerations that that teams should also bear in mind.
Got it. So coming to the complete, data strategy and understanding. So there's a interesting question here which says, do you think the role of chief data is more active into breaking those silos, or do you foresee other senior roles like CTO, CIO, should divide source components into infra, analytics, MDM, etc.? Do you foresee the resolution is a data strategy? Who should be the sponsor? CEO, CDO, CCD, digital O, that is again a CTO or CIO. So I think we've answered there also. I think Mohammed has asked on the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to understand, like, what is a good data strategy look like? You guys work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, you can
Maybe
answer.
I can take us first stab, and then Louis can add on, right?
Sure.
See, in my opinion,
Yeah,
breaking down data silo and unifying, centralizing them
correct.
is definitely a C-level program. And I know Mohammed had a lot of C's there.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but I will even say, like, it depends on the size of your company, but it's probably even a CEO's initiative. And I think the reason why I think, like, a
yeah,
CEO initiative is, I think it needs alignment with a lot of other with your CIO. So they are the CIO owns all the upstream system of record from where, like, you curate your data from, right?
yeah.
And then the CDO, of course, the chief data officer, is the person who's going to drive this unified data transformation strategy.
Mhm.
And then there are other, your chief business officer, or your other business heads, who are, you can call them as, your users, or
Mhm.
people for whom you're doing these digital transformations. So there's a lot of change management that
Mhm.
the chief data officer is responsible for, and they're directly accountable to the chief business officer, because a lot of these transformations help in driving positive ROI, right? So I think it's a collective effort with shared responsibility, but driven from the analytics office in a typical setup.
Got it. Got it. So I'll just ask the question differently to Lewis. I think recently I happened to watch one of those. Mark Zuckerberg was saying, right, you're not a tech company unless your CEO has a technical skill, or a little bit of tech understanding, and even in the board members and the leadership roles, right? So that calls for a calling, like, in terms of how tech should come from the top to down approach, right? So you're not a tech company unless your CEOs, everyone's aligned, right? So at somewhere there is, like, I think what Mohammed is trying to, I think, understand here is, like, there is a conflict. Analytics team want to build these kind of stuff and take amazing product out there, but somewhere there is a gap in terms of, I think, CEO leadership level to understanding building those cloud capabilities as well for their breaking the data silos there. So I think Lewis can take this up, in terms of, you mentioned in previously as well, sometimes it is the management or the leadership that kind of needs to. So what data strategy do you think would be ideal, like, top from the top down approach? Like, how should one approach?
Sure. So look, I think there's always something that among the question of the C-suites that is
Got
actually missing on the space,
got it.
and that's actually the board of directors.
Got it.
Because major investments like a data integration initiative or breaking a data silo program aligns with a vision of a long-term business strategy.
Correct.
That is defined at the board level.
Correct.
And they will monitor the progress and the impact of the program, and they will make that a scorecard item of the CEO.
Correct.
So it's not something that the CEO comes with it, but it might be something that is considered at the board level for overall strategic program.
Correct.
Then as a chief executive officer, you will probably you need to allocate the necessary resources and the budget, right? You got to communicate the importance of the initiative to the key stakeholders, and you got to make final decisions to major strategic directions you would like to take by giving that vision and leadership across the board for whatever the program of the data silos could be, right?
Correct.
But then you have other players, right? Which is the chief technology officer, you have the chief information officer, you have the chief data officer, you have the chief analytics officer, you have the chief data technology officer, CFO, CRO, right? All of them come to play. And trust me, they all play a role in this ecosystem, right? Because as the CIO aligns a data silo program with the overall IT strategy, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And manages the implementation of data integration solutions and ensures that data security and compliance across the systems is integrated, plus coordinating the departments to identify what are the data needs and the different challenges and etc. You need a counterpart that is actually overseeing technical aspects of how to break down the silos, which is the CTO, right? How do you evaluate and what do you recommend? What are those technologies going to be, right? And how are you ensuring that the technical infrastructure can actually support the data integration efforts we're discussing, right? And then people is talking about the CDO, right?
Yeah.
The chief data officer here is actually developing and implementing an overall data strategy, which is not limited to just the technology.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
It has data governance initiatives. It has data quality, consistency of data, promoting a data-driven culture, and making the organization data literate.
Absolutely.
Are all part of the roles of the CEO. Right. And then, of course, you got other parties, because then you have like the chief analytics officer, which is actually trying to identify how to leverage integrated data analytics, how to develop strategies that extract insights from the data, right? And how do you ensure data integration efforts are supported across all the advanced analytic capabilities that the organization is providing? Right. Along those lines, you're going to find people like the CRO, like the chief risk officer, right? Because he's actually evaluating and managing the risk of data integration, ensuring the compliance, data protection regulations are met, and also defining a risk mitigation strategy for the data silo program, right? So all of this come into play and that's why I started with the board, right?
Yeah.
Because the moment it becomes an overall organization scorecard item, right, then it becomes a mission of the company.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. That's how I would try to long answer Mr. Mohammed's short question.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a long C-suite rant. Okay, that's good. So yeah, now coming to the data complexity and how do you how does cloud infrastructure help in terms of handling such data complex volume of data and all of those things? What are some of the technical barriers that you guys have encountered in integrating data on the cloud, and how have you overcome them? So that's the question. I think Sriram can take this and Louis can add later. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the advantages of cloud solutions, as we discussed, right, is the is the integration or connectivity with a lot of your popular upstream data source, upstream source systems of records, right, like your ERP systems or your maybe core banking system, right? Um, uh, but I think the real there are also challenges, like there could be legacy data sources,
Yeah.
like when you're migrating from a data silo to a to a cloud platform, there will be the legacy data sources. So migrating them might require custom integration or custom body of work. How do
Mhm.
you migrate them, and then how do you retrofit that data, which is probably in a different schema, doesn't have the attributes that you wanted to have today. So retrofitting them with your with your new data, um, uh, that's a design challenge, right? And then the second design challenge I see is around bringing the data but not having a robust data model. Like, how do you want your data lake to look like? How can you design your data lake in a way that is very optimal? There's no redundancy of data, like even going back to your textbook around, like how does your database design looks like, right? And then of course the typical challenges around drafting policies for access controls,
Mhm.
implementing row level securities where required, like region specific security controls,
Yeah.
yeah, and then exception management, and then data lineage, cataloging your data, creating descriptions, data dictionaries, making it easier for your users to understand what the data looks like, and so on, right? So these are all, I would broadly classify as technical challenges that that a lot of leaders encounter when they try to break this data silo.
Correct.
But I also want to call out the most important factor, which is change management, or I think Louis mentioned about data literacy, right? So
Yeah.
driving change with your stakeholders, with your users,
Correct.
uh, almost having them to change the way they operate, having them to change their status quo, and modifying or changing them to the new way of operation that you have now laid out,
Mhm.
is a very important non-technical aspect, which probably requires a lot of training, a lot of education,
Correct.
and so on. And then that will indirectly again boil down to, like how much trust do they have in your data, like how trustworthy is your data,
Yeah.
how what quality is your data of, and so on. And that's a different world, which I think we can tackle someday. But these are all, I would say, the challenges that that organizations face.
Correct. Just before I go to Lewis, I think Mohammed again has asked, like, shouldn't we really be centralizing the C-suite roles into in one master role, multi-skill to achieve the data silos at the end of the day? I think Lewis, you can take that and you can add to Sriram's previous conversation. Yeah.
That's an interesting question, right?
Yeah.
Whether the world has considered merging uh, CXO roles, right? Um, so I think when you look at the roles of the CXO side, um, depending on the dimension of the industry, right?
Yeah.
What you're going to find is there is a trend that is driven by different factors, including technology governance, for that matter. Like, for example, CIO, CTO merger. Some organizations can combine those roles because there's some synergy between what the CIO and the CTO do, then that will reflect in some overlap between IT infrastructure and IT innovation.
Yeah.
You can combine a CDO with a CIO, for example.
Yeah.
Sometimes the chief data officer is merged with the CIO role because it aims to align a digital strategy with an overall IT strategy,
Yeah.
right? You can combine a CIO with a CMO because what happens is due to the importance of data-driven marketing, and customer experience, and the CIO might take some of that, right? You can combine a chief financial officer with a COO, right? Companies can merge both roles to create a tighter alignment between financial and operational strategies, right? You can do a chief risk officer with a CISO, for example, right? So there are possibilities for the emergence of these hybrid roles, but it's very unlikely that you will be able to create CTO, CIO, CDO, CRO, CFO all into one, because the skills are quite different. There are some C-suites, like I mentioned, that have some cohesiveness that you can merge, right? But not everything, right? It will become very hard to do that.
Makes sense. Yeah. So I think there's another question. It says, considering the number of CXOs that exist in an organization and sensitivities involved with customer confidentiality and company confidential databases, I would like to know who actually owns the data in an organization and what is his or her responsibility when the company data is moved to the cloud, where a new entrant to the field is the cloud service provider. So this is a question from Venugopal, which I think very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe I can take a stab at this, right?
Yeah.
I think, again, different companies have different titles and ways of organizing themselves, right, to drive business value. But I think the ultimate responsibility of of owning data or curating data and persisting them and making them available in a timely way for decision making, I think is primarily the role of a data/analytics department, which in many organizations will be led by a chief data officer, right? So the accountability is like pretty straightforward there. I mean, the responsibility is pretty straightforward. And there are several, again, as I said, upstream sources which feed data to your data warehouse, which have the accountability to push timely data, right? If you're upstream, I mean, basically data warehouses are garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have the right data inside, you're not going to show the right data outside. So that accountability lies with a lot of systems teams, which is likely a CIO's organization. And then we're almost, if you take about the typical RACI chart, right? The responsibility, accountability, consulted and informed. I think you pretty much consult with your stakeholders or the business teams who have data stewards. Like these business teams have data stewards who are in certain areas your data may not be in a system. You may have to work with some data partners, some providers, right? So there are typically these outward facing data stewards in different business teams who are responsible for the quality of getting that data, right? So it's a collective role. Again, depends on how the organization is is structured. But data/analytics teams have the complete responsibility to own this, to curate this data and own them, right? And then Luis.
I was going to mention, right? I'm reading that. I've been reading that question like 3 or 4 times already. Look, I think there's one way to see this. The ultimate ownership. Let's talk about the ultimate ownership of the data is the organization as the whole. And that's how you should see it. That's how Venugopal, I recommend you to see it like that. The organization is the ultimate owner of the data.
Got it.
Then the board of directors and the CEO have the highest responsibility for the data assets. Okay?
Yeah.
Your chief data officer would be considered your primary data steward of the data, right? Who's responsible for driving the data strategy, the data governance, and the data utilization. But that doesn't mean he controls the functional ownership of the data, where different departments and units might have different ownership for specific data assets or data sets related to their functions. Example, HR, employee data, finance data, and such forth, right? You're gonna add 3 more layers to that. Data governance committees, cross-functional committees for data governance, legal and compliance. Legal teams often have a say on data ownership, especially regarding sensitivity and regulated data, right?
Correct.
And then you have IT departments who typically own the data because they have the infrastructure, right? But they're responsible for the security, the accessibility, the storage, and so forth, right? You got the data stewards, as Sriram was talking about, individuals or teams designated for specific data domains, right?
Yeah.
And then you have a shared responsibility model that companies adopt, right? Which is different roles have different responsibilities managing different data assets, right? And et cetera. So this is an evolving concept, but in practice, when you talk about who's the owner of the data, organization it is by providing a clear data governance policy, defining the roles and the responsibilities of data management, defining the processes of resolving the conflicts of data ownership and its usage, right? And providing a regulated audit and reviews of data ownership and stewardship across all of it, right? So while the CDO or similar role takes the lead of the data strategy and the governance, right? The true data office ownership is typically distributed across the organization, right? With the ultimate accountability resting at the top of the leadership chain, right? So the clear overall concept answer to this is to have a well-communicated framework for data ownership, data management that aligns to the overall organization structure, goals, and regulations.
That's pretty interesting. Thank you, Louis, for that. So one follow-up question on that, before I move to the, entire real-time data processing. So I just want to understand, like, what are some of the guardrails that an organization should put, to ensure, the safety and the security of data within the organization, right? What are some of the guardrails that they should keep in mind, or the governance part?
Yeah. So again, I think we've covered it through multiple aspects, but I think when you talk about guardrails or governance, right?
Correct.
I think it's very important for data teams to have very well formulated policies for
Correct.
access controls, right?
Correct.
Uh, and and I think a typical my experience working with different data teams is different tiers of access, right, and different privileges, multiple roles accessing data, like a data developer accessing data versus a data user, a business user accessing data, versus a business user who wants to access a potentially PII data. All these different roles need to be very clearly defined, and then your data also has to be very clearly defined around, is this need to know information, is this a PII sort of a data, right, a personally identifiable information, and accordingly the formula the policy needs to be formulated. And then I think one point that Louis mentioned about governance, different countries having different compliance related factors. Another way to look at it is your retention policy, like how long of a data can you persist, especially important when you're dealing with a lot of customer data. Different, again, domains in different countries have a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year retention policies and so on. So a data archival mechanism is also an important consideration that organizations need to look at from an overall data governance perspective.
Makes sense. Louis, would you like to add something here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long list when we talk about guardrails, right? I mean, but I'll just mention a few things that could be considered as common mistakes and issues that can arise for implementing effective guardrails on data, right? Look, some of the most common things that I've encountered throughout my career, it's a lack of clear data governance policies. The issue is that an undefined or purely communicated data handling rules is the issue. The solution for that is completely the opposite, right? You got to develop an effective, widely communication and comprehensive data governance framework.
Correct.
It requires a lot of effort. Took me through 2 seconds to say it. Might take you years to build it.
Makes sense. Yeah.
In inconsistent data classification.
Yeah.
The issue there is an improper and inconsistent categories of data sensitivity. And that's going to implement a standardized data classification system across to provide training, etc. That's the solution. But the problem is improper data classified.
Yeah.
Then you're going to find inadequate access controls, pure data quality management, lack of data lineage, insufficient data measurements, weak data security practices, inadequate data retention policies, and of course, like you were talking today, siloed data management, right? So all of these are problems and guardrails you need to solve for.
Correct.
When you're part of these. It sounds easier said than done. This is an entire career on this, so definitely it never ends there, right? There are guardrails that might not be technical, like the ones I mentioned. Like, for example, I can mention one that is neglecting data ethics, right? The issue is that you need to have ethical considerations in data use, but those ethical considerations are typically overlooked, right? So do you have or not have an ethics committee on what are the guidelines for data usage?
Correct.
That becomes pivotal, and that's another guardrail that might not necessarily be a technical guardrail, right?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thanks for that. So now moving to, understanding, real-time data processing that happens, right? So constantly the enterprises are, getting real-time data request and all of that. So, and processing real-time data becomes very crucial, right? So how do you ensure that, integrated data across cloud platforms is not only centralized, but also available for real-time analysis and decision making for the leaders or the people on the top there? Yeah.
So I have a very different take on this. I think I want to start off by saying, I mean, this is a very age-old debate about real-time data versus loading data through batches and jobs and so on, right? I think it's very fashionable to try doing real-time data processing, but I think it brings out its own set of challenges around extensive processing / computing power, capturing change logs, like what happens when a data that you already persisted changes and so on, right? So I would want to dial back a little bit, and if you're a part of a data team, I would urge you to ask if the use case really requires you to have real time data, right? uh, I think a significant portion of the reporting analytics use cases could potentially be solved by your age old batch jobs, what they call, like batching jobs and so on, scheduling them, optimizing the transformations that you that you do in your through your queries or whatever, pipelines that you build. uh, those are some techniques, and those are some proven techniques to help you provide clean data with a reasonable latency, right? Now,
Correct.
said that, there could be real time streaming data processing use cases for which you need streaming approaches, and some of these approaches again are natively available in cloud solutions, where you can implement PubSub and stream data onto your data layer. You can keep your transformations as minimal as possible, so data is flowing as again as with as minimal latency as possible. And then of course you can also present real time data in your presentation layer, at your visualization layer, embedded into your systems, to drive more real time analytics and so on, right? So again, but again, the word of caution is to really look at what business use case that this data set, or that what business problem are we solving, and then take an appropriate call. That will be the my 2 cents on this topic.
That was thanks for that, Sriram. Louis, would you like to add anything here?
Yeah, Lucas, we're coming to a close. I think real-time data it's been a topic of conversation since, I guess, I started on my big data days back in 2011 or something.
Okay.
Real-time data requires it's a different lens when you look at what is real-time data processing, right? You can use streams of information to process information, like when you're going to hear technologies like Kafka, Flink, Spark streaming, etc., which is an event-driven architecture to handle data as it arrives.
Yeah.
Right. For that, you require a very robust data infrastructure. Consider cloud solutions are scaled and flexible to run something like that gives you high volume, high velocity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can have some of the tools that Sriram mentioned, like Tableau, Power BI, Grafana, for live dashboard visualization. Right. And then you can integrate, different business processes, like real-time data feeds for key business processes using machine learning algorithms to detect and correct data anomalies on the fly, right? But then you're going to very fast need an optimized data storage and retrieval, because you're talking real time. It means that the only mechanism you have is to have in-memory databases or caching systems, or faster data access, which will require a large implementation of indexing and query mechanisms that are effective, right? You're going to find other techniques that are out there today, because the world has allowed us to do that, which is edge computing, right?
Yes.
That you can process the data closer to the source, so hence you have a faster response time, reducing the latency, driving better data decision making. Right. But ultimately, right, it ends up with defining a real-time data strategy.
Correct.
Right, that needs to align with what is the business objective, which is what Sriram alludes to on his use case, right? Identifying what those key performance indicators, what are the benefits of real-time monitoring, real-time data processing are. It's fundamental. As you implement this sort of technology use case, this is one of those use cases where I can mention that leveraging cloud-based solutions, right, is, especially when you can do serverless computing and event-driven data processing, becomes a fundamental area for you to achieve real-time data processing. If you try to achieve that on your own premise data center, you're very fast gonna find yourself in an everlasting ecosystem of supporting infrastructure, which is not in the best need of the business, right? So yeah, I mean, real-time data processing is an entire art, if you ask me, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So yeah, just I think we're out of time. So I'll just so I think Sriram mentioned a very interesting point in terms of ROI of measuring the success of such data integration programs, right, on the cloud. So I just want to understand, like, are there any specific metrics or KPIs that you guys track to ensure that the integration is effective and it's actually driving business outcomes? So is there any particular strategy that you have put in place that can be shared here in this workshop? That
So I think the success or ROI, right,
Correct.
is almost different dimensions. Like you can think about it as a balanced scorecard, right?
Correct.
And if you were to think through, right, there are different areas
Mm-hmm.
across which, like, you can measure success, right? One fundamental reason why we are breaking down this data silo
Yeah.
into a unified data warehouse is
Yeah.
probably, like, low cost savings. Like
Correct.
earlier you had maybe legacy systems, duplicate data sources, and so on, right? So
Correct.
one dimension is around the cost savings that you have driven. That's one dimension of measuring success.
Correct.
Second is around how much has moving to a cloud data warehouse
Mhm.
improved your performance, right? And what's the latency, how much of data are you processing per minute, or for a particular duration,
Mm.
right? And another important consideration is how available is your data infrastructure. Is it available 99.9% of the times, or is it available 99% of the time? That's another important, like,
Mm.
success metric of integrating data, right?
Correct.
And then we double clicked a lot on all the compliance, security related aspects,
Correct.
right? Another success metric is, again, how compliant are you. And one way to measure that is doing periodic audits to your data warehouse, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Data quality is another dimension, like how complete and how
Correct.
much accurate and timely data are you giving to the business, right? So they typically call it the CAT framework: completeness, accuracy, and timeliness of your data. So that's one aspect. And last but not the least is, you're doing all this to drive data driven decision making into your organization. So how satisfied are your users with the data integration efforts that you have driven? How
Mm.
much do they trust your data, right? Maybe some user surveys, or customer satisfaction surveys, or
Mhm.
something that you can think about. But holistically, like, these are all the dimensions that you can use to measure or track the success of your data integration efforts.
Yeah, and Louis, anything to add here? Like, what are some of the success metrics that you keep in mind when such initiatives are taken place? That
Look, I think the success metrics
Yeah.
are not really within the technology of the data platform itself, right? The
Mhm.
success metrics are driven by the actual jobs that run through the data platform, and whether they can complete the job in time to provide the significant business value output required to
Mhm.
make a decision, right? Or
Correct.
to give an informed element of data to put a report or any of that. So anything that it requires consistent data processing on a frequently basis, the
Mm.
fact that the data is there, it's available, it's understandable, it's interpretable. You don't
Mm.
need to be looking at spread silos everywhere to
Mm.
put the pieces together. And if those jobs run effectively,
Yeah.
then you're actually achieving the business value and the return on the
Mm.
data side. That's
Mhm.
what I would probably tell you in the end. So yeah,
That's
interesting stuff.
yeah. So yeah, and I think we are at the end of the discussion. So I just want to conclude by asking both of you, in terms of what are some of the key advice you would give to, developers and IT leaders who are currently facing challenges with data silos, and how can they best leverage, cloud solution to address these issues? I know we entire session was in terms of breaking data silos using cloud integration. So what advice would you give for all of these IT leaders and developers? What should they keep in mind when they are trying to break data silos on a conclusion note?
Yeah. So again, I'll keep the answer short. We
Yes.
spoke a lot about the technical aspects, right? So, but I think the most important aspect is like executive, winning executive buy-in, sponsorship, for unifying all the data, data silos into a data warehouse. That's I think that's an area where I would want like IT
Mhm.
leaders or
Mhm.
even data leaders to focus on, right? I think the technical stuff will follow, but the
Ah,
the whole thing around getting the buy-in, driving the change management with all your departments
correct.
who are to like share your data,
Mhm.
and then stakeholder management, driving user change and so on, right? So these are all some aspects that along with all the technical aspects which for the past like hour or so we discussed.
Yeah,
These are some softer aspects, some sort of leadership aspects that I would like to like double click on,
correct.
that I want people who are pursuing this journey to keep in mind,
Correct.
and I think that's ultimately is what is going to drive ROI at the end of the day.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, Louis. Yeah.
I think as a closing remark, right? Just take away that breaking data silos is an ongoing process
Mm-hmm.
that requires commitment, collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
continuous improvement,
Mm-hmm.
all among the lines of guidelines that technical leaders or developers should follow, which is helping or collaborating, working, or developing a comprehensive data strategy,
Correct.
prioritizing data governance.
Correct.
Some developers can adopt an API first approach,
Yeah.
right? Implementing a strategy for data lake or data warehouses, or you know, um, or delta lakes, they call them in some industries,
Correct.
right? You can leverage cloud technologies as much as possible. Consider hybrid solutions, on-prem, cloud resources, etc.
Correct.
Data quality is one of the areas you need to focus, right?
Mm.
How much do you invest in data integration tools, ETLs?
Yeah.
Um, and then, of course, prioritizing data security and compliance,
Mm-hmm.
along with the areas of encouraging a data-driven culture and all of these across the tech industry, right?
Correct.
Adopting practices that exist today across the organization, not necessarily limited to data,
Mm-hmm.
like agile DevOps practices, skilling and reskilling development programs,
Correct.
how much you leverage AI and machine learning, not only for the business, but for yourselves.
Yeah.
That becomes quite important,
Yeah.
right? And ultimately, can you establish cross-functional teams that include IT and business stakeholders all together,
Okay.
right? So I think the advice for technical IT leaders, developers, they should have all of these things in mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? And try to be a part of it.
Amazing, amazing. I think that was beautifully put by Louis and Sriram there. That is, I think, brings us to the end of Decode second
Hmm.
episode. So I just want to, on a concluding note, like as a data professionals, like what keeps you guys going? I know data you mentioned, right? So data silos is an ongoing decision. So what is that one thing that keeps you guys going in this initiatives and making these ROIs and success happen? What is that one factor that drives both of you in this particular industry then?
See, I think again, I don't want to sound cliched, but data is the new oil, right? So I think many of our companies, and especially the place that I work in,
Correct.
I think people can't live without data, at different levels. So
Correct.
that's why I think it's a very vital component.
Correct.
Uh, and then the real magic of data, as I mentioned, happens when there is scale. When you
Correct.
bring different domains of data and you try to draw correlations
Mm-hmm.
across different domains of data, right? So this whole uh, maturity curve, so to say, Gartner calls it a maturity curve of setting foundational data capabilities to building a unified data warehouse to doing some visualizations
Mm-hmm.
to doing your AIML to autonomous systems and so on, right? I think this journey is fascinating, and wherever I go, I try to steer uh, data teams and
Mm-hmm.
through the through this maturity curve and drive business value, and that's probably something that
Mm-hmm.
that keeps me going in this journey.
Amazing, amazing. And Lewis, what about you?
Just for one factor, right, that keeps me
Yes.
going, motivated and engaged throughout. Yeah. So I think even when I started back 14, 15 years ago
Yeah.
on this journey, um, my biggest driver is the ability to uncover hidden and complex hidden patterns, complex problems, and
Mm-hmm.
contribute to significant business or even societal improvements throughout the work with data, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
The impact that it can have a huge manifestation. So yeah, that's probably what keeps me going. Highly motivating.
Amazing. Yeah, I think thank you both Lois and Sriram for making this wonderful webinar a success. So I think that brings us to the end of the discussion. So I've shared the email for the attendees to share any questions in case you have. We'll be happy
Mm.
to share it across to Lois and Sriram if they can answer those questions later on as well. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you soon at our next episode of Decode. Lovely speaking to Lewis and Sriram, very energetic. And I think amazing people in the industry, one of the most experienced folks that I've met today virtually, but I would love to meet you guys even in person in some time in the near future. All the best and yeah, have an amazing day ahead. Thank you so much.